Hey, welcome back to the Husker247 HoopsCast. I'm Mike Schaefer, joined by Brian Christopherson. This is our basketball podcast, and it's where we talk about a NCAA qualifying basketball team from a year ago. Can they do it again? Can Nebraska have another season seemingly out of nowhere, relying on new coming talent, a few holdover veterans, and just enough recipe from Fred Hoiberg to sneak through what seems like it will once again be a meat grinder of a conference slate? Nebraska basketball. It starts in November, but we've got some action here in October that we want to get to, and kind of want to introduce you to some of these players. So who better to help than Brian Christopherson, covers basketball for Husker 24/7. BC, do you have names and faces down yet? Do you, if Gavin Griffiths walked by, would you know him without the specs?
Yeah, I think so. He's sneaky athletic. I would recognize that. He was described that way last week.
Nice of Hoiberg to get the stereotype in right away there. I wonder if he knows what he's doing on that.
Yeah, maybe he might. So I think I could. Braxton Mia, I could definitely get.
Andrew Morgan?
Up first glance. Oh yeah, I could get Big Andrew. I think I could do pretty well. Yeah. I'm not going to pretend like we're going to be experts on what all their games are like and how they're going to fit yet within this roster. That's what's going to be so interesting about this season. But it is a fun team on paper. I'm excited about it. It's again another veteran team of guys who have played a lot, whether it's been here or elsewhere, where Fred Hoiberg has really succeeded. Schaefer at that getting old, staying old thing, even though you got to kind of do it in a makeshift way in modern college basketball and change your roster a little bit every year. So there's reason for people to be excited. And I think they are. I saw they were just picked 12th out of 18 teams in the Big Ten. And
weirdly comforting. I'm okay with that. That's a good number. Like
you like
they,
it?
I want them to perform better than that number, but it's an 18 team conference. Like that's putting you in the top 2/3 of the conference, I guess, and not the bottom third. So if Nebraska finishes like ninth, I think that's a pretty good year. I think it's going to be a tough conference in
Oh, it
terms
will be.
of the quality of teams that you're going to get night in and night out.
Yeah, if you're ninth, you're in the dance,
Yeah.
So there you go. Take that all day long. And you're right. I think the competition is going to be stiff. I think UCLA is going to have a really solid team, and they come to Lincoln. That'll be fun. But I also think Nebraska's, 12 is fine, but Nebraska's never going to get, at least for a while, get the benefit of the doubt in preseason college basketball polls. It's sort of Husker basketball gets treated the way we wrongly sometimes with football, like treat Illinois or Purdue or something. You know what I mean? Like we act
I
like
do. I know exactly what you mean.
the history is greater. Like I saw a list recently, which was naming the top 40 players in the Big Ten, and it was done by Indiana guys. And they had Bryce Williams at 21, and I guess maybe that's fair. There's a lot of good players, but I think he's better than that. I mean, I think
Yeah.
Bryce is going to be. I think he could be even a top 10 player in this league. I really do. So let's have at it, though. What are you thinking as you kind of scan this roster? What's on your mind?
Well, I want to start with this. So last year, I happened to be privy to a conversation of essentially Fred Hoiberg telling a friend of mine that Rienk Mast allows him to run an offense in a way that he had never been able to at Nebraska previously, and that had me pretty intrigued by Rienk Mast. So, flash forward to and Rienk was obviously a huge part of everything that went well for Nebraska last year. Unfortunately, he is out for the 24-25 season, and we'll see what the future holds for Nebraska and Rienk Mast going forward. This offseason, not Fred Hoiberg, but a different college basketball coach I happened upon. We were in a conversation about college basketball, and he starts telling me no one is going to give him enough credit going into the season But Nebraska fans are going to find out real quick that Andrew Morgan is going to be a player for him. So I've already moved my chips into I'm an Andrew Morgan guy just based on this conversation that I had. This individual felt like that was Nebraska's best pickup of all of their transfer portal additions. He thinks Andrew Morgan is going to help them, in terms of replacing Rienk Mast and just in a variety of different ways. Feels like he's a little bit of an under the radar get in the transfer portal, where Nebraska brought in a lot of different guys and brought in some shooters and some players that have played in some big games. But North Dakota State's Andrew Morgan was the one that stood out to this individual. And he's pretty excited about what could happen with him.
Yeah, when you thought about how do they make up for Rienk as he recovers this year, Morgan was a huge pickup in that regard. 6'10", kind of fills out the same frame on the stat sheet. Different skill sets in some ways, but he's been credited by Hoiberg as being really good around the blocks with some of his moves, and can get some stuff down there. And people might remember this. There was that week where people were kind of tracking where Hoiberg was at, for about 4 days on the portal search. And I'll always remember Morgan, I believe, was the first guy they saw. And I mean, that doesn't tell you everything, but it tells you a lot about how much Hoiberg and this staff saw in how he can fit a specific need for this team. So it doesn't shock me to hear someone say that. But that's what's going to be really interesting about this team is like, you don't know quite yet who, besides Bryce, of course, and Jawan, like who are those new guys who turn out to be like players like 3 through 6, like as far as most trustworthy and all that. Like Berke has a load of potential, gives you a lot of length. He's really interesting. I think Hoiberg thinks Gavin Griffith's best basketball is ahead and said you can see why he was like a top 40 recruit just a year ago. Like, so let's not act like his story's written just because he didn't tear it up for one season in college basketball. He was highly sought after, including by UConn as a recruit. So that makes him a really interesting guy. And then I think there's a feeling that Connor Essegian can fill it up similar to Keisei. I know that, Keisei was very much a showman, so there maybe that part isn't quite the same. You miss a little of that. Maybe Connor could still run down to the other basket and hit it, after he hits a big shot or run into it. But I think there's a feeling that he can really light it up in this offense.
Do you think after a big 3-pointer, he'll just squish his face together with his hands while he's screaming, running down the court? Because I don't know if we're going to see that. One of the fascinating things about this team is that your brain basically is like, okay, so this guy can be Rienk Mast and this guy can be Keisei Tominaga, but it doesn't have to necessarily they don't have to try to emulate the 23-24 Nebraska basketball team. They can take parts of what was successful last year, take some growth from some of the players that are returning and some of the new guys. And Hoiberg's a hell of a basketball coach. I mean, one of the difficult things of the initial part of his time here is you didn't get to see him be a good basketball coach because they were just so bad in terms of talent. Like they couldn't match up to other teams talent-wise. He has different ways that he can try to get guys open for shots. They have different versions of a similar offense that they can run based on the personnel that's there. We don't know what it looks like if with just sort of Bryce Williams running the show. I mean, they could have an isolation heavy offense where he's kicking it out after he's driving in on team. So there's a lot of different ways that this can go. And I just want to caution people, like, don't fall into the trap that Andrew Morgan equals Rienk Mast, because while there's similarities, they're going to have different versions of an offense and different things that they're going to do. I'm excited to see what this looks like in early November. I'm really excited. I'm jumping around here, Brian. I'm really excited to see what Bryce Williams looks like in his second year with Nebraska. That's probably the guy I'm most excited about for this upcoming year.
Yeah. Before that, I think you made the best point that will be made in this entire pod. It's to try not to fit everybody into a specific hole of, this for that. Like you're replaced, and So I'm glad you said that. But yes, Bryce at the end of last season was, I thought, phenomenal. Like the last, like you go to the Big Ten tournament, and he should have been on the all Big Ten tournament team, by the way. The way he played in those games. And then even in the loss to Texas A&M in the dance, he was that guy who you could tell the moment wasn't too big for him. He could get to the basket. He could draw fouls like when you had to have it. Obviously, he could hit outside shots when needed. And I think you saw what a scorer he can be. He didn't always have to be that. Like he would have games last year where he had a memorable. I can't remember if he got the triple double against Purdue or was one off of it when they upset him in Lincoln. But remember
One off.
he had.
He only had 9 points in that game, but he also had 9 assists and 11 rebounds.
Yeah, and he had a block or something at the hoop that when it was kind of closing it down.
Multiple blocks,
just
3
like
steals.
Like
a stat stuffing game.
Man's block, and maybe it's because of beard. It adds to it. He has that beard, that gives you a little something if you're playing good ball. Like if you were a good baller, Schaefer, I'm not saying you're not, but you're probably not as good as Bryce Williams. But if
I'm not.
If you're as good as him, I'd say like if you did anything well, that was like a man's play just because of your beard. Like I would give you that extra. So
yeah, I wish I could go back to playing intramurals in college and high school and have a beard like this. I think I'd have earned a little bit more respect. People still would have seen my shot, and probably the respect would have been gone, but the beard would have added to it.
Kind of having fun with it, but when Nebraska was at its best last year, like even though they didn't shoot it great, like at Kansas State when they won there, guys like Bryce and Jawan, it just felt like in certain games where they rose up and they were like the 23-year-olds going against the 18-year-olds, and not, you felt like that man against varsity versus JV kind of feeling just in the way they put a grip on the game with rebounding and block shots. So if Bryce and Jawan can be consistently like that with that maturity and just sort of a little bit of that gravitas or whatever it is that comes with experience and having been there, done that, it's going to be huge for this team. Because I think there's a lot of people in this league that cover basketball, as we kind of talked about how they fly over Nebraska, that forget Juwan Gary's even there. Like, and you talk to Hoiberg or listen to him about Gary, and he'll speak on he's one of the best, most versatile defenders you can have, one of his favorite guys to coach. I think we're still about to see the best basketball from him if everything we've been told this offseason is true. So I think he's got another level to his game. He might be able to go.
You know what else I'm excited about, Brian? Nebraska has like 2 real point guards on their roster for the first time in several years. That's going to look a little bit different. And in a weird way, it's going to feel familiar and comforting to me when I see a traditional sort of offensive set started by a point guard, whether it's Wooster or Ulis or whoever. I'm really sort of fascinated how that plays out, because both of those guys are, Wooster more than Ulis, but they played a lot of basketball.
Yeah. I mean, you got to let the competition go. My hunch is Wooster's going to be the starter, and he's 6'5" and gives you that length and all that stuff. Pretty good defender. And you look at his assist totals and points totals. I mean, he's going to have numbers amongst like 3 categories together that we haven't seen like from a Nebraska player before. That's how much college basketball he's played to accumulate those stats. So I think they feel like they really got a winner who can do all the little stuff for you that sometimes goes unnoticed. And it is going to be a big difference, though, seeing like a true point guard at that spot. And I think there's going to be a willingness to let Bryce still play some point. I think Hoiberg likes how that looks sometimes, especially when you get the rebound and he's just bringing it up the floor. And you know that he can do that now. It doesn't have to be all you have, but it's a nice option to have in your bag.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I like what it looks like at the end of games when you're trying to work the clock and you're working the ball around at the top of the key. Nebraska had so many turnovers in what I would call sort of the volleyball line era or area on the basketball court, up by midcourt, where just sort of lazy passes that were telegraphed. Defenders were able to pick off and get easy baskets. I hope we don't see that as much this year. The one thing that I question as we get closer to the start of this season, and it's kind of fascinating because for much of last year, I was probably highly critical of this individual, but he did a lot of the small stuff. He helped Nebraska out. He won games specifically with his play in the post and doing the dirty work, and that's Josiah Allick. Do they have a guy who could step into that role and, grab you 8 rebounds and shoot just a few times a game and do all of kind of the dirty stuff? And then in addition to that, do they have a front court player that has the athleticism to match up with some of the better teams in the Big Ten? Those are sort of the concerns I have as we look at this iteration of Nebraska basketball. Again, they feel like they have shooters. They feel like they have guys that can make the defense hard on you at times, and they have guys that can play pretty good defense. Last year, they lacked that front court athleticism, and it showed in some games. I'm wondering if that's going to be an Achilles heel for them again in 24-25.
Well, it's like these other things we talked about. You need kind of just a composite of that player. Like it might have to come from 2 or 3 guys,
different guys, yeah.
Different skill sets. Like they could play multiple guys at the 5. He even talked about Berke being down there at times with who they have on the floor. Obviously, Braxton Mia. Braxton gives them something they haven't had before, just as far as a rim protector and some of that stuff where you could throw lobs up and just know your guy's going to go get it. So there's some things you lose in Josiah, maybe you pick up in some other guys, and you hope it all evens out. But it's a good point because I was with you with Josiah, loved him as like an individual, but the first 2 or 3 months, 2 months of the season last year, it felt like the awkwardness was sometimes greater than the other parts. And then he got control of that. Like he controlled that awkwardness, and you saw the best parts of his game shine. And he was such a tough player for other teams to deal with the last month or 2 of the season. So I don't take for granted trying to figure out how you find whatever it is to answer for his absence now.
All right. Anything else we want to get up? It was just a real short introductory podcast. Is there anything, Brian? Are you going to be there on Friday? Are you going to this opening event?
I'm not sure yet. It's down in the rail yard this year. It's kind of cool how they're doing it. So I like that they're trying new stuff with that. I think it'll be fun. I think there's going to be a lot of energy right now for the start of this season just because of last year. And I think people believe there can be a carryover even though you have new faces. So it's an exciting time for Husker basketball. You're going to be we'll get there when we get there, but I mean, they play St. Mary's in that game in South Dakota, and I think that's going to be one of the biggest games of the non-con to put on your resume. So there are these fun games to mark on the calendar it's coming up quick, and that's good.
Yeah, it'll be basketball season before we know it. It'll be that vortex of college football, college basketball going on in early November where Brian won't feel like there's enough hours in the day and I'm bothering him to do multiple podcasts on multiple different sports. He's going to launch into a conversation about Dylan Raiola, and it's going to finish talking about, Juwan Gary. Like that's how these things sort of work because your brain gets so fried by the end of it. But we're inching towards basketball season, and we're excited to cover it again, just like we did last year with the Husker 24/7 HoopsCast. That turned out to be a fun season, and we'll probably bring back Guess a Random Husker Hooper.
I'll try to do better this year. Yeah, I'll try to do. Yeah. I had hit a bad percentage there. Might have to like tweak the game slightly to like give me a better shot. Like make it all like 1990 to 98 guys or something.
No, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to have them hiding out in the green room. And then when you get it wrong, I'm going to bring them in real life, and they're going to talk to you here.
And here's Rich King. Did you even know Rich King?
Big man. Went to the NBA for a brief moment. Played for the Sonics, I want to say.
Yeah, he was Sonics. He was on the first Danny Nee NCAA team. He was on that squad.
I know a little about Rich King, but it's not. I don't have any memories of Rich.
He went to the same elementary school I did, apparently, not at the same time. But that was a big deal to hear as a youngster that Rich King had gone to Sunny Slope Elementary.
Shout out Sunny Slope.
Yeah.
All right. Anything you want to say? No. Anything else? We're done here.
We're done. We ended on a high note with Sunny Slope.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna shout out North Park as well. They don't have basketball players coming out of there.
Sunny Slope.
As long as we're giving our elementary shout out, I want to make sure North Park is covered as well. Be sure to check out everything we got going on at Husker247. If you're listening for just basketball only, we have content for that as well. That'll be, rolling throughout the month of October as we get you prepared for the upcoming 2024-2025 season. If you like football, boy, do we have you covered at Husker247. We got everything you need. Plenty of coverage as Nebraska season rolls along. Nebraska Rutgers this weekend. We'll have a post-game podcast. We'll have plenty of coverage on the website, so be sure to check out Husker247. We'll be back when more basketball podcast content is needed.